This video is Systems Analysis Design Video 2B and is entitled Estimating Time and Work. I'm Dr. Renaud from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this presentation. This presentation does kind of follow along with the second half of Systems Analysis and Design 7th edition by Dennis Wixom Roth, and it is the textbook for our course. Lots of research has been done over the years to try to figure out how much time we should spend on each of the main phases of our project. The research has kind of shown the following rough numbers for the systems development lifecycle, that we should spend about 15% of the overall time on the project planning the project, 20% doing our analysis, documents gathering, and all kinds of other things. We should spend about 35% of our time doing real detailed design work and actually writing the code. If we've done all of that up front, will be a little less than a third of the total time on the project. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it does too as an old programmer, that if you've done your planning, your analysis, and you really know what you're going to do down to the low level, then actually doing it isn't really that difficult or that time consuming. For those of you who have had BUIS 3600, the project management course, or who are going to take the project management course, we're going to spend several weeks on the idea of creating work breakdown structures, and we'll be talking a lot about work breakdown structures in that class. But in this class, a work breakdown structure basically is to identify tasks. Identify things that need to get done with their durations. How long is it going to take to get things done? And then we also need the dependencies of these tasks. So, which tasks have to be done before I can start this task? So, before I can do this, I have to do these three things before it, or we can't get started on it. And if we understand everything we need to do, we've got a nice task breakdown. We understand where we're going. We understand what's got to get done first and what can wait and how they all interdepend. We can really create a detailed plan and start figuring out what available resources we need. Because if everything is dependent upon this one piece, then we need to make sure we get that piece done soon. And we need to make sure that we get the resources we need to do that allocated as quickly as possible. Um, Remember, though, that when we're dealing in a project, the more people, the more complex things become. Remember the idea of communications complexity, and you've probably seen it in other classes. But if you have two people, there are two ways to communicate. There's one way to communicate, just back and forth between them. If you have three people, there are three ways to communicate. You can communicate this way, and this way. If you have four people to communicate, there are actually six paths of communication. And the number of paths of communication increase tremendously as you add members to a team, to a project. Um, there have been some recommendations, and in the 3600 course, it's kind of recommended that the ultimate in project team size would be 7 or so, give or take a couple. Um, because of the complexity of communication and because of lots of other things. But if you've got a huge project, a huge multi-year project, you're going to have teams of a lot more than that. And again, there's a lot more about work breakdown structures in BUIS 3600. But remember, a work breakdown structure, we identify the tasks with durations and dependencies, and then create a dated, detailed plan with our available resources. This is one of those huge questions. How do we motivate people? How do you keep your team working? How do you keep your coworkers working? How do we build this cohesive group? First thing, avoid unrealistic expectations. Okay? Don't set timetables that no human or group of humans could possibly ever do. Just don't set unrealistic expectations. Another thing, reward good effort. Now, rewarding good effort can be different for different people. There are some people that really strive on being called out in front of their teammates and being made an example of, look at what a good boy Jim is, or look at what a great job Bob did, or look at what a fabulous team player Amy is. Um, some people really strive on that, and other people are embarrassed and hate that kind of thing. So some people may want to be rewarded in good effort as just a pat on the back, just a quiet man. Thanks, you saved our bacon on that one. Or maybe taking them out for a quick business lunch. Just, hey, you did such a great job on that. You want to go to lunch? I'll pick up lunch. Come on. Um, that might, or look at somebody, a team member, and say, you did such a great job on that. Why don't you leave at lunch on Friday and start your weekend early? We won't miss you. Get out of here. That little thing doesn't cost much, but it means an awful lot to the employee. Um, Really foster quality. Don't let your employees and don't kind of say, we'll fix it later. No, encourage quality from the start. Um, let's do it right the first time, guys. Let's quit doing rework. Let's quit wasting our time. Um, on the reward good effort, financial reward top performers was in the book, and financially reward them, give them raises, give them bonuses. Yeah, but that can cause a lot of problems with other team members, especially support team members that don't get the extra money, that don't get the extra praise, um, and others that feel, well, I did that much work on blah blah blah, but you didn't pay me anymore. So you really need to be careful with that one. And it needs to be done judiciously and with a lot of thought about the team dynamics. Before you do something big, before something huge happens, before you need to make a huge decision, go talk to your team. Don't come down on the team and say, oh, well, guess what? We've changed everything and everything changes in the morning. Why? I thought we were doing good. You know, if there's going to be a huge design change or a schedule change or something like that, sit down with the team and talk to them before the big decision is made. Now, sometimes big decisions come down from management and you don't have a choice. But most of the time, you as a manager of a project, you as an analyst in a project, know some of these decisions long before the people on the ground do. And then create a good working environment. Be sure that you're watching your P's and Q's. Be sure that you're um, making sure that you don't have employees um, bringing politics and other kind of hurtful things into the office. Create a good, safe working environment. And if you've done all of these things, you're going to have, probably more often than not, some darn good team members and a good project staff. Another thing that builds team cohesiveness, um, another thing that builds IT cohesiveness and IS teams to work together are standards. Now, standards shouldn't be repressive. Standards shouldn't be overbearing. Standards shouldn't eliminate the creativity of your employees. Um, but to have documentation standards, to be able to say to your people, these are the formats we want to use. Here are some template documents. Here's the information that we would like to see in our documentation, or these are the things we want you to document. By making it very clear and by again creating template documents and that type of stuff, it actually makes it very easy for an employee to comply. Also, be sure to give them time to do it. Don't expect them to take their personal time to do the standards. Bake the standards into your expectations in your work breakdown structure. um, Create coding standards like variable naming standards or indentation standards or comment standards, or even you're going to use this library of functions as a priority over this. You're going to use these open source tools, or you're going to use these closed source tools, and you're not going to use these tools over here. Um, a programmer may balk at that originally. Initially, they'll go, "No, I don't want to do that." But after they've gotten into the standard, if the standard has been well thought out, like Google's standard or Amazon standard or IBM's some of IBM's standards, the programmer gets into the standard, and once they get used to naming variables that way, indenting that way, documenting code that way, it just becomes second nature. And then when you say, well, you don't have to do that anymore, they go, but I want to. This is the way I know how to do it. It really helps everybody, and it makes the code more easy to maintain and for other people to also be part of the team. If we're all doing similar things, if we're all using similar variable names, if we're all indenting the same, it just makes it easier for everybody to read. So coding standards are, in my opinion, necessary, somewhat evil, but very necessary. Procedural standards. What are the communication standards? What if you see a change? What's the procedure that needs to happen? If you see an issue, what's the procedure to go through to make that to communicate that with the rest of your team? Um, by having those very clearly defined up front, it again makes it so much easier for everybody to do their job and to do it seamlessly and smoothly. Standards for how specifications are written. Again, if they're all standard, all use the same template, all use a similar language, then if you move from one project to another, you don't have to relearn how to do specifications. You kind of know. Also, within a project, imagine you're doing a multi-year, multi-phase, big project, a big development. Um, to have the standards, to have the specifications written following a standard means that they're just going to be easier to read and easier to follow from the beginning. User interface standards. How many times have you used a piece of software or a website where the submit button was down here for one part of the system, but up here for another part? And in one part of the system, you enter date as month, day, year, but in another part of the system, you can enter day, month, year, or in another part of the system, be sure that your user interface standards that you've created kind of sample user interfaces, and you've talked about user interface standards so that every screen feels the same. They all have the same coherence. They all have the same menu bars laid out the same way, because that's going to make your users so much more. Well, once you train them in one part of the system, training them in another part of the system becomes easier because they don't have to learn how to use a new user interface. And then, another standard is to use shared libraries or objects. Why in the world should each programming group create their own interface to the database or create their own interface to this external system? We should spend the time, we should do the analysis, we should do the design to create these shared libraries and shared objects that so we don't have to do the coding multiple times and have multiple places for potential failures. So these are all standards that we need to define, and you as the analyst, you as the business leader, you as the director of this project, as the one who's trying to make this happen, you need to be thinking about these during the analysis, planning, and design phases. This concludes video 2B. I'd like to say thank you for watching. Remember, this video is copyright by James Imbrano, PhD. All rights are reserved, and I'll see you in future videos.